African James Bond, a man of mystery. James, why did you come here? James Bond, you of all people. Why are you here? What is all this? This gang will kill us. They are merciless to the core. James was the kind of man you wouldn't look at twice. He was not particularly intimidating, nor did he boast an air of dominance. Instead, he exuded a subtle charm, effortlessly blending into the background while still being noticed just enough to be underestimated. He drove a sleek, vintage midnight blue Aston Martin, which made him appear like a man of taste rather than a warrior. He spoke softly, never raising his voice, never revealing too much, and always wearing an easy smile. James had a past that no one knew about. He had been trained in combat, intelligence gathering, and survival. His skills were honed in places where the rules of civilization did not apply. And yet, he had chosen this quiet town as his refuge, perhaps as a way to escape his past, or to redeem himself for the things he had done. The small town of Ohobo had been struggling under the oppression of a ruthless gang called the Black Fangs. They extorted businesses, terrorized families, and left a trail of fear wherever they went. Every night and day, the residents of Ohobo run from pillar to pole, trying very hard to escape the notorious gang. The authorities, either too weak or too corrupt, did little to intervene. The people had given up hope, except for one man. The people had lost hope, and were living under the shadow of all is well. After several appeals to the police and local authorities to come to their aid with no positive answer, people began to abandon the town, their businesses and jobs, leaving Ohobo to another town where they could breathe new breeze of life. Just then the African James announced his arrival quietly without any notice. The gang had thought that it was business as usual, but what awaited them was huge. James had arrived in town only a few months ago. He rented a small house at the edge of the community, spent his mornings at the local cafe reading newspapers, and took long drives in his stunning car. He was friendly but never intrusive, always appearing as the man who knew little and cared even less. What no one knew was that James was watching, listening, waiting. The Black Fangs had grown bolder. One evening, they burned down a small bakery owned by an elderly couple who refused to pay protection money. The town mourned, but no one dared speak out. The message was clear: defy them, and you will suffer. James, however, was different. He had seen war in many forms. He had fought battles that no one knew about and had faced enemies far worse than a group of street thugs. But the key to victory was patience, and he was patient. He befriended local shopkeepers, gathering information under the guise of casual conversation. He learned which officers in the local police force were on the gang's payroll and which ones still clung to the idea of justice. One such officer was Detective Claire Reynolds, a woman who had spent years trying to fight the gang's influence but was constantly outnumbered and overruled. One evening, James sat in the dimly lit cafe, sipping on his tea while appearing absorbed in a crossword puzzle. In reality, he was listening to a conversation between two gang members at the counter. "Boss says we need to deal with that journalist," one said, his voice low. "That guy from the city?" the other asked. "Yeah, he's been snooping too much. If he keeps poking around, we'll have more than just the cops sniffing." James took a slow sip, mentally noting every word. A journalist? That could be useful. He decided it was time to dig deeper. Under the cover of night, James made his way through the town, careful to avoid attention. His target was the town records office, a place rarely visited at such late hours. With his skills, getting in was easy. He searched through files, looking for any recent reports or complaints against the Black Fangs. There were many, far too many. Yet, all of them had been ignored by the authorities. Then he found what he was looking for, a report filed by a journalist named Eric Valdez. The document was incomplete, but it indicated that Eric had uncovered something major before he suddenly disappeared. James knew what he had to do next: find Eric. His investigation led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place reeked of danger, but James had been in worse situations. He moved cautiously, his instincts heightened. As he entered, the sight before him was grim. Eric was tied to a chair, bruises covering his face. Before James could react, a cold barrel of a gun pressed against the back of his head. "Well, a voice sneered. "Looks like we have a visitor." James raised his hands, his expression one of mild surprise, as if he had simply wandered into the wrong place. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was looking for my lost cat." The gang members laughed. "Lost cat, huh? And you just happened to be here, sneaking around?" James gave them a sheepish grin. "I have a terrible sense of direction." They didn't see him as a threat. To them, he was just some clueless guy who had no business being in their world. They tied him up next to Eric and left, still chuckling about his stupidity. Eric groaned. "You shouldn't have come." James smiled faintly. "Actually, I should have come sooner. But don't worry. I have a plan." Eric looked at him, puzzled. "You're tied up, in case you haven't noticed." James gave him a knowing look. "Am I?" And then, as if by magic, James slipped out of the ropes with practiced ease. James moved like a ghost through the warehouse. One by one, the gang members fell, never knowing what hit them. He used their underestimation of him to his advantage, taking them down with a mix of stealth and precision. By the time the boss of the Black Fangs realized what was happening, it was too late. James stood before him, his soft voice now carrying a chilling edge. "You made a mistake," James said. "You let me get too close." The boss sneered. "You think one man can take us down?" James smiled. "I don't think, I know." Just as James was about to deliver the final blow, the police stormed in. Detective Claire Reynolds had been tipped off, and with the gang in disarray, it was the perfect moment for a full sweep. Claire confronted James after the dust settled. "Who are you really?" James simply smiled. "Just a man with a terrible sense of direction." And with that, he drove off, disappearing into the horizon, leaving behind a town that would forever remember the man who saved them, without them ever truly knowing who he was. The battle was swift and brutal. James dismantled the Black Fangs with surgical precision, exposing their operations, eliminating their leaders, and ensuring that those who survived were either arrested or too scared to return. Claire confronted James after the dust settled. "Who are you really?" James simply smiled. "Just a man with a terrible sense of direction." And with that, he drove off, disappearing into the horizon, leaving behind a town that would forever remember the man who saved them, without them ever truly knowing who he was. That night and many other nights that followed, a hobo community slept like a newborn baby whose only duty is to sleep and disturb his mother when necessary. Those that ran away started coming back, businesses and merriment returned to a hobo. The gang exposed the uniformed men who had been aiding their operations and received shares after each operation. The enemy within is indeed the most dangerous enemy. Lessons learned from the story of African James Bond. 1. True strength lies in underestimation. James Bond's quiet and unassuming nature made him a mystery. Many ignored or dismissed him, which allowed him to act when it mattered most. The story teaches that sometimes, the most powerful people are those who don't seek attention. 2. Courage in the face of oppression. The people of Ohobo were afraid, but James showed that standing up against fear and tyranny is the only way to reclaim freedom. His actions inspired justice, proving that even one person can make a difference. 3. Justice prevails over corruption. Despite the Black Fangs controlling the town, justice eventually triumphed. Detective Claire Reynolds represents those who refuse to be silenced, showing that persistence against corruption will ultimately bring change. 4. Appearances can be deceptive. James was perceived as harmless, but he was a master strategist and warrior. The story warns against judging people based on superficial traits, as real power often lies beneath the surface. 5. Patience and strategy win battles. Instead of rushing in recklessly, James took his time, gathered intelligence, and struck at the right moment. This highlights the importance of planning and patience in overcoming challenges. 6. Evil thrives when good people do nothing. The town lived in fear until someone took action. The story emphasizes that ignoring problems or submitting to oppression only strengthens the oppressors. 7. Sacrifice and selflessness. James didn't seek recognition for his heroism. He simply did what needed to be done and moved on. His story reflects the idea that true heroes act for the greater good, not for personal glory. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe and like. Leave a comment on the comments section. Let us know how you feel about the story.